This is an RNZ podcast.
It's 20 to 9, and that means it's Midweek Mediawatch o'clock. Colin Peacock joins me now from the studio in Wellington. Hello, Colin.
Hi there.
Let's get straight in because, we've got a lot to talk about tonight. And we begin with this row between the platform and the broadcasting watchdog, the BSA, which has very much escalated this week.
Well, yes, it has, or the same arguments have just played out with a bit more intensity, maybe. Quick recap. So the BSA is the broadcasting watchdog that you can complain to as a member of the public about anything that's on radio or TV, effectively. And it says that since 2019, it had to think about this and considers it has jurisdiction over broadcast-like, non-downloadable live streaming type platforms like The Platform, owned and run now by Sean Plunkett. So it received the complaint about that, wrote to him to say, we've had a complaint, we are thinking about what we do with this. In the meantime, we're advising you of this and wanting your input. And he goes, well, I never got any memo in 2019 and does not consider himself covered by this at all. So, I talked to the Broadcasting Minister, Paul Goldsmith, about this on Mediawatch on the weekend. He says, look, he's happy for the BSA to test its assumption of its jurisdiction, also for the platform and its backers to maybe test this legally. Just yesterday, he told Lloyd Burr of Stuff, it's not obvious to me why one group of people broadcasting in a similar way would be subject to the BSA and other shouldn't be, which a lot of people have said. And he also said, we're talking about a very small number of programs, and he mentioned one I hadn't really thought about, Herald Now, on the New Zealand Herald's website.
Exactly, yeah, which is an NZME thing, right? So NZME owns ZB, but the Herald is its own kind of thing, and it's a digital broadcast.
Absolutely.
Well, it's a digital offering.
Yes, and the minister's comparison was it's on air at the same time as TVNZ Breakfast, which is covered by the BSA as a TV broadcaster. Herald Now is not because it's online.
Yeah.
And yet, I think you've made the better comparison, actually. So ZB is radio without pictures, with the same host, Ryan Bridge, who was on air just a couple of hours before Herald Now, working out of the same premises, and it's not covered. So, the law is out of date, and that's not Sean Plunkett's fault or anyone else's fault, but we are kind of catching up because our laws are out of date. Successive governments, including this one, haven't really had to deal with it. Sean Plunkett on Monday said he feels very vulnerable hearing the broadcasting minister say, well, let this get tested in the courts. He doesn't want to have the heavy hand of the state, or some sort of guinea pig test that might cost him a lot of legal money. And he said, I'm going to the Prime Minister's post-cabinet press conference on Monday to ask about it.
And what did he ask?
Well, he did. He got quite an interesting response. Here it is.
Yeah, well, you've obviously right in the middle of this one because, the issue is I think the situation raises some pretty good questions, and I've got a lot of sympathy about it being overreach and an impingement on free speech. So I think, the issue for us is let's actually see where Goldsmith gets to with a review of it all. But we know that this area. Well, let's see where he gets to, because I know he wants to think about it a little bit. But I just say to you that we know that regulation in this area is incredibly difficult. If you're seriously going to tell me you're going to go off and regulate and legislate for every social media piece and online, we know it's a difficult environment, as we saw with the Fair Digital Bargaining Bill and other things. So I just say to you, I think I've got some sympathy. It's a bit of an overreach.
It's Prime Minister Christopher Luxon responding to the question, what is a broadcaster? He was also asked, is there any need for the BSA? And, well, that's relevant for various reasons, chief among them because the ACT Party's actually suggested a bill to disband it.
Yes, they have. It's kind of, so that's why it's interesting hearing the Prime Minister instinctively go for, well, we're having a look at it, but my initial impression is, this is a bit of overreach and the danger of limitation on free speech and so on. Of course, the Broadcasting Standards Authority would say they are an instrument to protect free speech from those who would shut it down with egregious complaints or whatever. So, and also with Paul Goldsmith not really saying the same thing as the Prime Minister. Yeah. But where they're really at with it, I mean, there's been all this to and fro on the complaint and the response from Sean Plunkett, which has sparked all this. But back in February, we went into this in the program in the weekend on Mediawatch. Back in February, the Ministry of Culture and Heritage for Paul Goldsmith released this document saying, here's a bunch of policy proposals to reform the media, and modernising media regulation was in there, specifically capturing, with a modern regulator or regulatory regime, broadcasters and streaming platforms, and specifically not just people who put stuff on existing social media platforms and downloadable podcasts and things like that. So they have thought about it. It is effectively his proposal up for consultation, and that's where it stands.
The Prime Minister's reaction, talking about apparent overreach, is that a common view, do you think? Is no one on the bureaucrat side here?
Well, there was actually a really good debate on the platform on Monday about this. Sean Plunkett hosted it after 8 a.m. I listened in live, and it really was like listening to the radio. There was a news bulletin, had Frank Gardner, the BBC security correspondent, in the news bulletin talking about Gaza, Israel, the peace process, and so on. Then into this interview. So Sean Plunkett insisted, I am a webcaster. I'm not a broadcaster. Didn't know about this 2019 decision. Don't consider it applies to me. Retired judge and tech law expert and columnist David Harvey, he writes in The Listener and on Substack, look, he said the platform and the likes of Reality Check Radio, they are voice over internet protocol, VoIP. They're not broadcasting, technically. It's not transmission over telecoms networks, as the BSA seems to think. So the audio is slightly scruffy, but here's him making that point.
It operates on top of internet infrastructure without actually contracting with telecoms carriers for their broadcasting services. So internet radio really is an information service rather than a telecommunications service. Now, Stacey Woods of the BSA talks about broadcasting over Wi-Fi, but Wi-Fi, in fact, is narrowcasting, particularly if it's 5G. It is not broadcasting. So it's a completely different type of technology.
Yes, so Judge Harvey there is saying, he describes it as a black letter, I guess a strictly legal approach, whereas the BSA's view, in his words, were, they're just looking at it and saying, if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, it must be a broadcaster. But he reckons Parliament would have to determine this. It's not up to the BSA to interpret the 1989 Broadcasting Act in that way. But also as part of this debate, Stephen Price, former barrister, used to work with Sean Plunkett on Fair Go. He was Fair Go's go-to lawyer and formerly a Mediawatch contributor too, way back in the day. He said, no, the BSA is entitled to interpret the Act in this way. And he made the point that just because, Sean says the Plunkett came into being well after in 2019 when the BSA decided, I think we do have jurisdiction over this broadcast like internet streaming. He says it doesn't mean that the likes of Reality Check Radio and the platform are exempt.
If there's a law passed that says that vehicles must drive on the left-hand side of the road, and the only vehicles that are around then are diesel cars, and it clearly covers those, and then 10 years later, petrol cars get invented, you can't go saying, this is a petrol car. It's different. That doesn't have to drive on the left-hand side of the road.
Yeah. And after that, Sean Plunkett picked up and goes, no, look, this is more like the maritime police coming ashore and telling me that my car is actually a boat. And it's not compliant on the road. That was his argument.
Oh dear, if you have a phobia of metaphors, stay away from this one. Either way, does it crimp freedom of expression, do you feel? A chilling effect?
Well, this is where I think the temperature's gone up a bit much with politicians and lobby groups getting involved. Because as Stephen Price said, look, I'd be amazed if that... remember the comment at the heart of this was Sean Plunkett saying on the platform that he believed, tikanga amounted to mumbo-jumbo in the context of the Fire Service Initiative or something. And Stephen Price said, look, I'd be astonished if that complaint was considered and upheld. He even said at one point, he said, Sean, do you really think the BSA want, to open the can of worms? I'm paraphrasing, didn't quite say that, of dealing with the platform. Shit, no. That was what Stephen said. But Sean claimed that he believes members of the BSA, and he named one, do want to find a way to crimp his freedom. And Stephen Price replied, no, that's if that's one individual, that's not the BSA. And there is a structure in place that means that can't happen. And then Sean Plunkett carried on talking about he believed that woke ideology, that this would be an instrument over him if the BSA had jurisdiction, and Stephen Price challenged him and said, well, what's woke? Just tell me, what is a woke decision? He said, I could point you to a whole lot where people have had concerns and they've said, no, there's freedom of expression here, and I could too. You may not like what was said, but it doesn't cross a threshold, and they are entitled. We uphold their freedom, their rights, freedom of expression, to say those things on the air to a general audience. So I understand, like, ever since the BSA adopted this mission of protecting New Zealanders from harm, that concerned a lot of journalists saying, well, there's journalism we do that does harm, but it's in the public good and you've got to have it. So, and we might talk about a bit more of that later, but that's kind of where we are. And I think a lot of people are reaching to the conclusion that the BSA is or could be an instrument of censorship that could now be expanded to a lot of areas of the internet. In fact, on the ZB Drive show today, Heather Duplessis and Barry Soper were talking about the BSA getting weirder and weirder and wanting to expand and control the internet. And that's really not what they're doing so far.
I mean, if this goes the distance and runs through the legislative process and the Broadcasting Act, that is a distinct possibility. This could, I feel like this could be a huge deal.
Well, it could. I mean, but the thing is, governments, particularly of the blue colour, have not been minded to interfere in this at all. Way back in 2013.
Well, it's so tricky, right? It's so tricky.
Well, it is. But and this is the thing. When, say, Judith Collins looked at it, she was Justice Minister. I think her predecessor, Simon Power, had the Law Commission look at this. They said we need something like other countries have, a modern regulator that takes on board the internet in various ways. Instead of creating a harmful Digital Communications Act and so on, we can have one agency that does this. So you don't end up with those weird, Herald Now, TVNZ breakfast.
Exactly.
You don't end up with that regulatory gap, as they call it. But no one's been minded to act. In fact, Judith Collins said something, we don't see anything going on in the news media that causes a problem. And indeed, the news media organisations themselves at that time created their own, this thing called the Online Media Standards Authority that's since been folded into the Media Council, saying, we'll regulate ourselves. Don't you worry about it. We'll take care of it. And the government was only too happy. So, I mean, it kind of suits government that doesn't want this problem and the current climate probably doesn't want to buy a free speech fight with lobby groups as well. Yeah. Well, I shouldn't speak for them, but that certainly would be part of the calculation I'd be making if I was a politician. And media companies, if you talk to their general counsels and the people that handle complaints, yes, it's a hassle when you get a formal complaint. You've probably been through this process. Most journalists have at some stage. It is awkward. But, do you want to be going to court? Because the thing that people who don't want to see even the possibility of any kind of statute-backed agency having domain over, internet communications, they're saying, well, if a breach is bad enough, it'll be breaking the law. It'll be cyberbullying. It'll be a privacy breach. It'll be defamation. And you can go to court, and that's serious. But, media companies in this economy, in this industry, do not want to be going to court and spending big bills. Dealing with that. And that's why, this is the thing, the BSA, I mean, the people who are suspicious about control and state power and so on, will feel it is, at the very least, a potential censor. But it cannot censor. It cannot stop anyone from broadcasting. So, I mean, technically it has the power to take a broadcaster off the air as a kind of punishment. But that's only ever happened, I think, once that I can recall.
For 2 days or something.
Yeah, it was alt TV, with extremely racist messages put out on air in a kind of unprofessional way. Nothing a legit broadcaster would do. So it's about standards and not censorship. I sound like now I'm a bit of an advocate for it, but it really could be a situation of, careful what you wish for in all of this.
Just finally, because I'm worried that we've not too much time left, and I'd like to get on to our other story, but there's been a lot of really interesting commentary around this. I think Chris Lynch Media hosted a really good debate on this as well, some good thought pieces too. I wanted to raise a couple of points and get your take on them. Shane Curry, the editor-at-large of the Herald, I think is his role.
Yeah, and he writes the Media Insider column.
Writes the Media Insider column. Yeah, apologies if I've got that job title wrong. But writing, there's no doubt media regulation needs to be tidied up. Social media is a wild west. There are many inconsistencies, but there's a right way and a wrong way to sort the mess out. On the face of it, writes Shane Curry, the BSA is elected the wrong way, but it might also be a deliberate strategy to force the government's hand on legislative changes. And also Duncan Grieve, writing for the Spin-Off, essentially saying there are only two ways to achieve all media being subject to the same standards, which are either a big Ofcom-style super regulator or ending our current regulatory regime entirely? I've asked you two massive and different questions here, and I'm sorry about that, but I'm interested in your thoughts on both of those points.
I don't think Duncan is quite right that it has to be an either or, either you let it go. But he makes an excellent point, and he's made it before, that somehow because of the regulatory gap and other forces, that the absolute standardless behaviour on the net, think of those scam ads on Facebook.
Yeah.
That Facebook just does not appear to care about in this market anyway.
Yeah.
That sort of stuff. I mean, if you're not going to regulate the internet, and that's not for content or privacy or anything like that, but just on that sort of standards, then you kind of have to accept that you have to allow people to say, well, you at your own risk, you swim in this pool of muddy water if you don't want to buy the bottled water.
Right.
It's like that. And as for the first thing with Shane Curry saying, could it be a strategy? That is possible.
I wondered that when it first happened.
I don't want to second guess
yeah.
people's motivations, but I would say
Totally.
in 2023, the government changed. Their annual report kind of coincidentally came out at that time. And Stacey Wood, the relatively new chief executive at that point, made quite a strong point saying, we need to sort this. We can't let this drift anymore. We've got to sort this jurisdiction. So people will always say, oh, this is a power play by them. They want more influence. They want to build an empire. In fact, that is what Heather Duplessis-Allen was saying on
Or just
CP
looking
this
for
afternoon.
clarity in a modern world with 35-year-old legislation.
Yeah, that is what it is. And in the end, they might be doing everyone a favour if... But it's interesting, it's not that. It wasn't that call 2 years ago that said, oh, she's right. We should look at this. We are long overdue for this. There is a massive regulation. It's not that. It's a controversy like this one with someone who's highly offended by, someone getting a notification, and Sean Plunkett, who will make an issue of it, saying, and in fact, Paul Goldsmith was having a bit of a giggle about that, saying, people in this space, he didn't name names, but he's saying they will want to draw attention to themselves and so on. So that's part of it. So it's that what's sparked the inquiry. But, it wasn't, when that letter went out to broadcasters in 2019, I don't know if it came to the attention of the ACT Party or the Free Speech Union at the time, but they were not up in arms then and saying, look at this power grab, we must draft a members' bill immediately or encourage politicians to do it to take away this overreaching regulator. Totally you can have an argument about whether it should be the BSA or not. But the other thing is, if Goldsmith is right and it could be made to apply to a relatively small number of broadcast-like operations, then it may be simpler than Duncan's or more cleaner. It still wouldn't be simple, but it may be cleaner and an easier line to draw. And there could still be the option of living outside of it if you want to and being unregulated.
Yeah, you're right. All right, we've only got a minute and a half left, Colin. I'm sorry, I'm very interested in that case. But what should we end with? Paula Penfold or the sad closure of Ensemble?
Paula Penfold's one was an interesting one. So she wrote this story about a guy called Fale Andrew Lesa, who appears to be, I'm not sure what the correct terminology, with fantasist, fabulist. He'd been claimed to be a UN diplomat, have a law degree from Yale, attended all these events overseas for New Zealand. She exposed him, wrote stories in the Sunday Star Times that he was a bit of an imposter, and then sort of had this anxiety, saying she went back to her days as a student, saying she lived across the fence from Greg Newbold.
Yeah.
He went to prison, had a heroin user, but then got a PhD, became one of New Zealand's leading criminologists. So she had some dark nights, I think, thinking, do we take away people's opportunities for redemption if we, expose them in the media like that? But I would argue that what she did was in the public interest and could still be part of that redemption process if it's possible to take place. So I wouldn't feel too bad about that if I was her.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was a really fantastic and thoughtful and thought-provoking piece that showed a lot of the innermost thoughts of investigative journalists. And Paula Penfold's Substack, really worth subscribing to, in my opinion, Cole.
Yeah, it's interesting when journalists lift the curtain a little bit on what's going on in their mind in a way that they can't always in the pages of their own publications.
Totally. Colin Peacock, thank you. Catch you next week.
Okay, cheers.